In James chapter 3, verses 1 through 12, James describes the danger of the tongue. That our tongue is set on fire by hell, and even though it's such a very small part of our body, yet it causes us so much distress and grief, and that if we're able to control our tongue, we're actually doing quite well in maintaining complete control and discipline of ourselves. There are a lot of people who can reasonably feel confident that they are doing pretty well in terms of resisting many forms of sin, yet will still struggle when it comes to the way that we speak. The Proverbs author has much to say about speaking, and especially about the fool and his talk. How there's the babbling fool in Proverbs 10:8 and 10. How it brings ruin when they speak in Proverbs 10:14 and 18:7. How they suffer discipline because of what they say in Proverbs 14:3. How the tongue for a fool is an invitation to conflict in Proverbs 18 and verse 6. And when, of course, does a fool seem intelligent? When they're not talking in Proverbs 17 and verse 28. A lot of times we want to think of the wise and the fool as kind of this binary. You are one or the other. The fact of the matter is, we can all be wise at times, and we all play the fool at times. And a lot of the times, when we play the fool, it is because of what we said. There's probably a reason why that phrase goes, that we put our foot in our mouths, right? Because it's what coming out of our mouths that gets us in so much trouble. How many times have we said things, and we wish we could get those words back? How many stupid things have we said in our lives? And this demonstrates our challenge in the trial that we go through when it comes to corrupt communication. That if we would speak the way we should, we wouldn't go through these difficulties, right? And look, corrupt communication is very common. We're going to find it everywhere and all over. And we can often rationalize it in our minds, but it doesn't make it right or profitable. And that's why it's good for us always to remind ourselves of things regarding corrupt communication, why they're corrupt, why we should try to avoid them. And in all these conversations, be very clear that on some level we're all hypocrites about it. I'm a hypocrite about it, but it's always important to go back to the source to see the way we should be living, to say how we should be conducting ourselves, and to be better at aspiring towards that. In Ephesians 5 and verse 4, we have a great passage to talk about these kind of corrupt communication. Neither should there be vulgar speech, foolish talk, or coarse jesting, all of which are out of character, but rather thanksgiving. This is what Paul encourages the Ephesian Christians, and really by extension, all Christians. Vulgar speech refers to base language, to filthy speech. We know what filthy speech sounds like. A lot of it will involve crude discussions of sexual behavior, crude discussions of other forms of biological behavior, generally what goes into filthiness. Swear words and the whole litany of swear words that exist in the English language would be included in this, and also many of the euphemisms that will be used for said swear words. And of course, the lamentable thing is that of all the languages in the world, the English language is so diverse. It has so many interesting, creative ways of expressing yourself that we really don't need to reduce ourselves to this kind of speech that is vulgar and filthy. We can also see filthiness in terms of the carnality of discussions when we get into the crudeness of it. So there's, of course, jesting that's going to go on the joking way, but even we can be having very serious conversations about kind of things that we shouldn't really be, that really don't provide godliness and benefit to having us look to the things that are above in the way that we speak of such things. It's very hard to have our mind set on that which is above, which Paul encourages in Colossians 3, 1 and 2, if we are very much speaking in carnal terms. Now, this doesn't mean that there's a time and place to talk about certain biological functions, especially in a medical context, right? There are times to talk about perhaps certain contexts like the marriage relationship where you can talk about certain things of carnality. But when it comes to just as general conversation topics, again, we can see this in so many different places in the world today. And in fact, it seems to be more prevalent than ever in public discourse. Some of the people that we should be looking to in order to elevate the discourse do quite the opposite. And so it's just very common for this kind of thing to be under discussion. And we need to be very careful about our language and how we speak about such things and try to avoid communicating about things of that nature. Foolish talk can involve all kinds of things. We can kind of ask, if someone hears me talking about this, will it lead them to have a favorable or unfavorable impression of me? Is one of the standards by which we can consider such things. Would they find me to be a good servant of God or some kind of buffoon or fool? Now we've got to be careful with that kind of standard, right? Because maybe what I'm talking about that they find astonishing or shocking is maybe indicting them for some sin they don't want to hear about, maybe accusing them of something they don't want to hear about, right? So there might be situations in which the opinions of others, it doesn't mean it's foolish talk, it just means that the people hearing are not responding the way they should. But we talk about foolish talking, gossiping, slander, being a busybody would certainly be incorporated in that kind of foolish talk, and that's very roundly condemned. Proverbs 10:18, Ephesians 4:31, 2 Thessalonians 3:11-12, and also in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 13. A lot of people want to talk about people, and there's a lot of foolishness in that. The way we talk and speak in mocking ways, in ways that make fun of people at their expense, excessive or hurtful sarcasm, lampooning people in derisive ways, all would be foolish talking. There are times we can have fun with people, right? And sometimes we can tease people, but we also need to look at the way the person's responding. And even if somebody's response is acting like it's okay, it may actually prove hurtful for them. And so we need to make sure that as Christians that we aren't involving foolish talk, right? Even if it's in jest, even if we want to use, we talk in these ways and everybody understands it's not being serious. Well, somebody might think it's serious. And maybe there's a deeper level of difficulty going on there where you should be able to have friends and to build them up and to speak with one another, even maybe have inside jokes that don't involve speaking foolishly in degrading ways regarding one another. And then, of course, there's the crude joking. And the word that Paul uses could refer to any kind of humor. But we should not imagine that God in Christ would have us to be completely cold, humorless people. We don't need more cold, humorless people. There are enough of them in the world. But the joking under the discussion is most likely what we call under the belt, or ribald, or obscene. Ribald is a way of talking about vulgarity. All joking and jesting that is vulgar, or carnal, or sexual, or appealing to base desires, therefore, would thus be condemned in this way. That if the humor reduces itself to that lowest common denominator, is that something we should be participating in it? If the humor that we're using has to deride other people, is it really honoring God? And so this is a kind of corrupt communication that God would have us get away from. And a lot of times we can understand what we are to avoid, especially when we can see about how we should be speaking. Because it's not that we're supposed to speak, in the king or queen's English in the most stuffy, formal way, and that's the only way we can speak as human beings. That's not at all what is necessarily expected. But we are to be concerned about how we speak. You go back to Ephesians 5:4. We're not supposed to do all of these forms of corrupt communication, but instead what? Rather thanksgiving. We should be giving thanks to God. We should be trying to find ways of glorifying, honoring God in all of our circumstances. We should not be trying to do this in a way where it's kind of quote-unquote Jesus juke, where we're just trying to, deflect from people going through distress or pain, or try to act like we can make it all better by giving thanks. But there is a time and place in a way that we can give thanks, even in the midst of other people's distress and trial, in ways that can help to encourage them, right? We need to speak positively in a lot of ways. There is that toxic positivity out there. Need to be careful about that. There are times that weep with those who weep, and there are times it's good to not. Remember, Job's friends were fine till they opened their mouths, right? There's time to sit people in silence, but there's also time to speak and to speak words of encouragement and positivity. In Ephesians 4:29, earlier in that letter, Paul had told the Ephesians, and all of the Christians, really, you must let no unwholesome word come out of your mouth, but only what is beneficial for the building up of the one in need, that it would give grace to those who hear. And so we have our language that has a test to pass, right? Does it give grace? Is it a gift to people? Does it encourage or does it discourage? Does it exude grace? Does it exude condemnation and judgment? Does it build up or does it tear down? We can also see Colossians 4:5-6, that our speech should be as seasoned with salt, that we may know how to answer each one. What's our language like? How salty is it, right? That's kind of a part of the colloquial terminology. It's something salty. The whole idea there is that there's just too much salt there. It's just something that you kind of retch at if you were trying to consume, and that we're not supposed to be that way, right? And our language shouldn't be so salty that it's just rejected. That it's obnoxious in what is left unsaid or how we present it or the attitudes that we're barely concealing underneath what we're trying to say there. But the other option is very much there, where there's no seasoning in our words. It's so bland that it's tasteless. It provides no value. It's something that a ChatGPT prompt could come up with, right? That's why we need to have that appropriate seasoning in our language where it can convict, it can do its purpose, but it's not insufferable in so doing. Whenever we talk about building up, it's important to realize that there are seasons and times where we are to speak the word in ways that rebuke and reprove. And so not every conversation, not all communication is going to be pleasant. Like not all gifts that we get are things we want to get, right? But even as we have to have those experiences, to what end are we going to have them? Are we being brisk with people just to be brisk? Are we trying to actually work them back to repentance, or are we just trying to shame them? There's a lot that we can ask about how we communicate and what are we really trying to accomplish with our communication as we speak about these kind of things. Because our speech is very important. There's a lot of power in words. Words of encouragement can leave a very strong impression. Was there something that somebody said to you? Maybe it was a teacher, maybe it was a romantic partner, maybe it was maybe one of your children or something that stuck with you for a long time because of it was a compliment or it was a word of praise that has stuck with you for years. Especially with us guys, sometimes if a lady says something about us, we'll hold on to that for years like that, right? It's amazing how that kind of encouragement can come. On the other hand, can you think of times where somebody said something to you that's cut you, and that even in your memory you can bring up to mind right now, and it's still cutting, it's still hurtful, which speaks again to the power of words to lift up, power of words to tear down. A lot of people have ruined their reputation just by one thing they said, an off-color, offhand statement, and their lives have never been the same ever since. That's why, as James says, the one who can properly exercise his tongue will surpass most of his fellow people in James 3 and verse 2. So that's why we need to think about what we say before we say it. Matthew chapter 12, Jesus warns that we will be judged for every idle word that we've spoken. That by our words we will be justified, or by our words we will be condemned. And it's not just, by the way, the words that we say. It's also how we decide how we're going to do the presentation of those words. There's a lot that goes on in communication than just the words that come out of our mouths or the words that we text or type or things. In fact, that's all the more apparent when you think about words just in text and how we have to kind of infer the emotion of what that means. Right? What does it mean as it says hi with a period? That means different things of different generations, right? Something to keep in mind. So it's not just what we say, but how we say it. There was a time and a generation, and maybe it was a particular attitude at a certain time, a certain level of privilege. Maybe it was a certain lack of regard for education or insight about such things, but where there's a lot of attempt to say, no, it's really about what you say. It doesn't matter how you say it. And that is just sheer foolishness. It's never been that way. How we communicate is just as important as what we communicate. And sometimes how we communicate will speak more than what we're actually trying to communicate. And so it's not just enough to just be as blunt and direct. And sometimes that's the worst way of approaching people, right? And it goes back to Luke 6:36. As you would want others to treat you, that's how you're supposed to treat them. And that goes a long way with language. How would you want people to speak to you about a given situation? Approach other people that way. Don't use it as try to self-rationalization, self-justification. Well, I would want somebody just to be open and blunt and direct with me. Be honest. That's probably not the best approach even for you. And it goes a long way in how we can kind of relate to others. Because the other very important thing about how we communicate is that impact is more important than intent. How many times have people, and we've probably done it ourselves, right, try to excuse us, well, it's not what I meant, it's not what I intended. It doesn't matter what you intend in the end when it's been taken a certain way. And sure, there are ways in which some people may not be the most charitable interpreter of what you've tried to communicate, but the communication process is a two-way street, and you have to own up the fact that impact is more important than intent. because impact is what happens. That's what we tell to our children, right? If you accidentally hurt somebody, the fact that it was an accident doesn't change the hurt. The hurt is still there. Impact over intent. And that is true with our language. And we need to be accountable with our language. We need to own when we've said things, or if we've communicated in ways that have caused difficulties, even if we didn't intend them, that we own up to that as humble servants of Christ who will be held accountable for our words by God. We can try to hide and justify ourselves in the present. There's not going to be able that opportunity to do that when we speak and stand before God. So the tongue is a very big danger. Causes us a lot of problems. And the corrupt communications we talked about are normal in the world, right? Full of vulgarity, obscenity, being derogatory toward people, tearing people down. But none of that should be named among the saints. We need to consider ourselves and how we communicate with each other, to strive to be encouraging, graceful, and seasoned in our words. So let us put aside all inappropriate talk, speak with encouragement, and give grace to all who hear. So thankful that you joined us. If you have any questions, comments, or thoughts about corrupt communication or how we should speak, we'd love for you to continue our conversation in the comments. I'm Ethan with the Adventist Church of Christ in Los Angeles, California. We'd love to be of encouragement service to you. How can we help you? Would you like to study the Bible with us? Can we do a correspondence course for you? Can we pray for you? Would you like to meet with us? Something we can do for you. Let us know. Please reach out to us at AdventistChurchOfChrist.org. You can also find us online at Adventist Church or Adventist Church of Christ on social media. We again thank you, and may the Lord bless and keep you, and make his face to shine upon you until we will meet again.